Fatherhood isn't easy, but in Autismland, it's a journey like no other. Join Mark de Grasse as we explore the highs, lows, and everything in between of raising children on the autism spectrum. With real stories, practical advice, and a touch of humor, we're here to navigate this unique journey together. For dads navigating life on the autism spectrum, you're not alone.
Welcome, everyone. You're listening to the Dads and Autismland podcast, where we try to connect autism dads and really with each other, but also expose everybody to kind of the things that we experience as autism fathers and bring light to the situation. A lot of us feel very alone most of the time, but as we've been doing more and more of these podcasts, we're finding that we aren't. We just don't talk enough. So we're trying to do more of that here. I'm very happy to welcome our guest today, who is Dennis Procopio. He has 14-year-old Bennett, who is moderate to severe autism and also has a couple of different issues that we'll talk about today, and just kind of get into it, what he's experiencing and what his daily life is being a father of autism. So welcome, Dennis.
Hey, thanks, man.
So we kind of chatted, before we started this podcast about some of the different, conditions your son has and some of the similarities that our sons both have. You actually just taught me the term echolalia, which we'll talk about. But why don't we just start with kind of your beginning experience with Bennett?
Okay. I'll preface this by saying I'm a bit of a monologuist, so just give me a shut it down sign if I start really rambling here. Bennett was born 14 and a half years ago, and when he was in utero, we at his mother's 36th month ultrasound, we found out that he was going to be different. The way he was different turned out to be that he had what is called achondroplasia, dwarfism. And achondroplasia is one of more than 300 different types of dwarfism. So there's a whole world there. So we were thrown a curveball right from the beginning. For 36 weeks, we thought everything was going typically. And then, hey, you're going to have a child with dwarfism. Hey, Dad, don't use the M word. Not cool. Okay, got it. And then, and then from there, we began our journey. We were in and out of children's hospitals with him and his physical challenges with dwarfism. And then at 3 years old in San Diego, California, I live in Southern California. In San Diego, California, he was diagnosed as level 3 moderate severe autism. So our journey, as I joked to you off camera, has been having a child who has dwarfism, is autistic, and is a redhead. So as I said, it's it's kind of a triple threat. He's a ginger kid. So what specifically would you be interested in having me share with you about our journey here?
Well, that's a lot, just to even before he was born, you knew you were going to have to, adapt a little bit to this special circumstance. What was that like? Just getting the initial, your child's going to be different from other children, and then just the progression of finding the autism diagnosis.
So I'm going to kind of let my guard down. I'm aware that I'm doing something, public facing, and because I'm sort of a higher profile guy because of my business, there's a tendency to want to play conservative, but I'm going to just go ahead and just let the vulnerability out for this, since I know it's primarily for dads. And forgive me if the things that I say sound a little crass, but when we first found out that Bennett was probably going to have dwarfism, my first response as a dad was anger. I was very frustrated because as a dad, I wanted a quote unquote normal kid. I have these visions of training him to be the next, Tiger Woods or Tom Brady or whatever, and for better or for worse. And I realized that I was going to have a child with a hydrocephalic head, little arms and legs, mid-face dysplasia, and he was going to get called midget his whole life unless Papa Bear stepped in and said, "We don't use that word."
Mm.
So that was the first thing I had to deal with, was the disappointment
Mm.
that I was getting something different than I ordered, and feeling like I was getting something less than, and trying not to have resentment toward the child, blame the mother, blame myself. That was there.
Mm.
Do you identify with that feeling?
Oh, well, I completely understand it. I mean, I think that's the thing that people don't get, because people are kind of always on that, like, well, that's amazing you're able to do this. And thank you so much for being open with that emotion too, because that's it completely, normal for the most part. I mean, you have your expectations. We all have expectations, especially if you're a high profile, kind of high performance person who teaches that kind of stuff. Like, hey, you set the expectation, you work hard, you get that dream, and you just push forward. And sometimes that's just not in the cards, or the path is completely different than you expected it to be. And for me personally, like, it's funny because with fatherhood and everything, I knew I'd always be a father, but I never had any expectation of what that would be like. I always, and maybe that was better, because I'm always kind of like, I just roll with the punches, has been my life to date. And so, no, but I completely understand it. And thank you for being open about it.
Yeah, for sure. As you know, um, since your kid, Damien, is the older of the two, right? So your first experience was, I imagine, getting the sense that something might be off, but not having the experience of a neurotypical child to sort of, as a standard to say, this isn't the
Hmm.
way the last one went.
Oh,
So we had, yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
that made a huge difference for me. I mean, it was kind of a mixture of, like, I was too I don't know, lazy, because initially I was kind of like, well, some kids are different. Like, kids are different. He's developing differently than other children. That happens. Like, I'm not gonna judge that. I'm just gonna say, this is a different situation. Plus, we don't know. And so I'm just going to be hopeful that we can figure this out. Maybe it will go normal. And so it was more like a, logical negotiation with myself on how I would treat this situation. I'm not going to jump at anything. I'm just going to wait and see. And so I think it allowed me to wade into it versus, for you it's totally different, because it's just like, this is going to be different, versus I had like years to process.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And especially since it was suggested to us at, the 36-week ultrasound that Bennett would probably be born with dwarfism. And we didn't really need a geneticist to confirm his dwarfism. The moment he arrived, we saw that he was different, in the sense that he was not typical. And it was confirmed that he had the dwarfism. So for us, that was a little bit of a red herring, because anything that prevented him from hitting uh, typical milestones, we attributed to the dwarfism. So, they typically don't give an autism diagnosis until at least 3 years old. So, with all of the complications from dwarfism, including major surgery, um, we didn't have him diagnosed until somewhere around 3 or 4 years old, when it was becoming obvious that he wasn't hitting,
Mm.
certain speech and just behavioral developmental milestones. So when we got the diagnosis that he was mod severe out here at Rady's Children's Hospital in San Diego, his mother and I just looked at each other and went, well, sure. Of course. Like, what
Why
else?
not?
What else? Right. What else is going to happen here? To her credit, I should give mom a shout out. She's amazing. And from day one, I was like, I don't want to have a kid with dwarfism or autism or whatever. And she's like, look, he's my son and I'll love him no matter what he is,
Mm.
no matter how he presents. And that really helped me take the ride and chill. I fell in love with him in the first, you know, 6 months to a year that we were together. And I'm like, yeah, he's got dwarfism. That's my redheaded dwarf,
Mm.
and I'm his daddy. And I really just took ownership of him. And now we have a great relationship. So,
Ah, I love
but yeah,
that.
tough times in
Well,
the beginning. Have you ever read Welcome to Holland?
no,
Bro,
on my
for
list.
all your listeners and for yourself, when we found out that we were having a kid with dwarfism, we were turned on to this short piece. It's not a book, it's just literally a PDF you could knock out in 30 seconds. It's called Welcome to Holland. And it kind of goes into the idea that, it's this metaphor or anecdote where you're on a plane, you think you're going to Italy, you're all ready, all your friends have been to Italy, and for some reason the pilot says, we're experiencing some turbulence, and the next thing you know, you land in Holland, and it turns out that that's where you're going to be spending your trip, and you didn't want to go to Holland, you wanted to go to Italy, but then you discover, well, Holland has nice things, it's got tulips, it's got windmills, and it's your responsibility to decide if you're going to make it a nice vacation or not. You accept,
Mm.
look, I'm not going to Italy, but okay, we're in Holland and we can have fun with this. So yeah.
Ah, I love that. Now that's it's funny because sometimes I think like I was oddly prepared for this just because I've always operated like that. Like just in terms of trips, like this one time I went to Vietnam in college just because I saw a banner on a bulletin board at the school. They're like, oh yeah, international business tour of Vietnam. I'm like, that's weird. Yeah, like sure, why not? I've never even thought about going there. Like I'll just go do that. And so, with the, I think that's just how I've been. So even with the, the autism diagnosis, I was like, yeah, some people have that, and that's okay. This will work. We'll make it work. And like you just said, like you just fall in love with, as soon as you are open to it, you're just like, yeah, this person's amazing. And
Yeah.
and honestly, I've learned so much that I'm kind of like, I'm super thankful that because it's different and that's fine. And also just the expectations of some, parents were like, okay, my child's growing up, and we've all known parents like that where you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen when this child moves out? Like this mom's going to fall apart or dad's going to fall
Yeah.
apart. What are they going to do with
Yeah.
themselves? We don't
Yeah.
have that. We're like, nope,
Right.
this is our family. We're together, and that's it. So, yeah, but that's excellent advice, and I'll definitely look up that book because that's very valuable for people to understand. And it's an opportunity,
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I relate to what you said, by the way, a lot. Like when the dwarfism thing, I've had a sort of a clever comeback for anything that the mean kids at the playground or somebody who doesn't know any better at a theme park or whatever might say. And if somebody says, oh, why is his head so big? Immediately, I'm like, because he's got a giant brain. And then immediately they're like, oh, do I have a giant brain? Yeah, I don't know. Do you? Uh, put it on them. People are like, as you said, oh, I'm so, worried that, he's going to turn 18 and move out of the house. I'm like, we're not worried about that at all. We are we are certain that he will be with us the whole ride. That's what we're doing. People are like, oh, they grow up so fast, little dwarfism joke. They don't stay little for long. I'm like, mine does.
No, no. Not worried about that. No,
um,
that's a great way to look at it. But even with the, you talk about the people saying things, and for that, it is upsetting. You get mad. We're still dads. Like if somebody said that to your neurotypical kid, you'd be like, all right, now we have a problem, and I'm going
yeah,
to deal with it. And so,
yeah,
I think your ability to turn that into humor and for me, when people do that, especially with like the R word, you'll hear sometimes.
yeah, buddy.
That's like that heats you up. And but even before, because I think about myself before, and there's movies like Tropic Thunder, whereas like Tropic Thunder had this, it seemed like a funny movie. Oh, it's making fun of everything, and they had that character Special Jack, and I tried
Okay.
to watch it, after having my son, and I'm like, I can't watch this movie anymore. It
Yeah,
just
buddy.
makes me so upset.
Yeah,
Uh,
dude.
but for everybody else, I'm kind of like, well, you just don't understand. You can't understand. And so I can either get mad about it or understand that you're probably ignorant and naive and feel bad for you that your world experience doesn't even allow people to be any different than standard people, and you're going to have a problem with it if it's any way else. And in some ways I consider them special needs too.
Absolutely. I want to point something out about your language. In the same sentence, you used the term ignorant and naive. So I discovered something along the way that helped me to rationalize how I deal with people. Feel me on this. It's a little bit of I'm a language nerd, right? But I feel like if someone genuinely is naive, like they don't know, like me at my kid's ultrasound, I dropped an M bomb because I literally didn't know that you don't use the term midget. It's not appropriate. Um, the doctor said, "Oh, yeah. So we use the term little people." And of course, I felt a little, I was young and I didn't like being corrected. So I was a little haughty. I'm like, oh, okay, because that's better, And he said, well, it's the community's preferred term. And I'm like, all right, I got it. So once I started learning what it is to be the father of a child with dwarfism and with autism for that matter, I started understanding the importance of respecting uh, certain language. If somebody doesn't know, if they're genuinely naive, they're oblivious. Now, for the ones who do know, but still say, well, it's not hurting anybody, like that's our word, we can use it. Now you're ignorant. You're literally ignorant. You've been told, but you're ignoring it. And so I have two different approaches. I have to determine for myself if somebody makes a faux pas, are they oblivious? Because if they are, I'll happily educate, and I'll do it in a way that doesn't make them feel corrected or stupid, and that makes them feel empowered, like they're doing something nice for somebody else who doesn't have their same gifts or strengths or privileges, frankly, social privileges. If I've run into somebody who's ignorant and they're like, oh man, doesn't matter if you call somebody midget, shit, they got midget wrestling, and they call themselves that, then I'm going to say, my man, we're about to have a mano moment where I have to help you to understand you're not going to say that in front of my son. And that's where Papa Bear comes out. Can you vibe with that?
Oh yeah. No, it's you want to be well, sometimes even for me, I'm like I'm above this. Like I have grown, I understand that some people are just like that. I can't change them and I should be pitying them that they can't even accept this in their worldview that they are offensive and that's a bad thing. But I'm still a guy, I'm still
That's what I'm saying.
angry. And honestly, it's, for me, my son is going to be much larger than me. My dad is like 6'5", 300 pounds, played rugby. And my son is on that
Wow.
same track where he's already
Oof,
175 pounds at 12 and he's
dude.
as tall as my wife. And I'm like, crap. So I'm already fight training and I've had years of martial arts prior to that. And I was in functional fitness specifically for MMA and soldiers and stuff like that for a decade. So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm gonna have to get even better at this stuff. But it's always in the back of your head. But I would never do anything that was like, overtly reactive unless it was gonna cause him harm in some way. Then all right. But that's could still happen. It's still in the back of your head. Like, okay, this person's being aggressive right now and they're not backing down from this. And I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to have, but that would only be around him. Personally, I'm like, say whatever the heck you want. Whatever. I hope for
That's right.
you that you never have a child like this, or maybe because you're like this, you may have a child like this. I don't know how the world works, and
Right.
maybe you'll
Karma
have to
might
learn
come
this
and
lesson.
get you. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So fun fact, I think you and I have some overlap in experience. Um, I uh I have a I also have a scrappy background. Started out as a guy born in Philly and had to fight in, street fight, and Philly's notorious for scrappers. So boxing and wrestling are something that you just learn as part of your upbringing. the Philly shell, yeah. I trained Taekwondo, realized that spinning techniques probably aren't practical,
They
ended
look
up,
pretty.
they look great, but they're probably in a phone booth. The Taekwondo is not getting you out of there. Um, and so I did some box, I boxed, and I also relatively recently really started getting into BJJ and training BJJ, and it was the BJJ that really helped me. My son, although he has dwarfism, he's super strong. We've got good genes, and he's like a little strong guy. And so in his teen years, he's been physical at school, and we've had to ask him. He's had to be restrained, and then the teacher's like, "We're really sorry," and I'm like, "No, I get it." To prevent not only self-harm but harming other kids and staff. Um, he has been physical with mom to the point that he's bitten and broken skin. He's pushed her down. She's felt genuinely threatened. He's coming at her like this little Chucky doll. And she's like, I don't feel safe. And then so I consulted experts, and they said, look, if you have to subdue him lovingly, not, like a dick, but like if you just have to, hold him down lovingly and let him know, like restrain him, there are times when it's appropriate. So sadly, I've had to do that. And I'll tell you that the BJJ really helps with that. Yeah. Especially because, like in your case, you've got a big guy. I think the BJJ is the great equalizer.
Yeah, it's so funny because I actually realized that a couple of years ago, and I'm like, I'm gonna have to get into BJJ because you could subdue somebody without hurting them. Because everybody thinks it's like, oh, you just got to punch them in the face. It's like, all right, hitting people is very dangerous for you legally. Like, I don't know if you know, but you could break somebody's face. You could kill somebody. You think that's going to be the best solution in most cases? Like, no. And then you have the subduing of, your own child, where it's like, well, if it comes down to, especially in a public situation, it's much better for me to do it than for a security guard to get involved or a police officer to get involved. I mean, you're talking about very dangerous. So
yeah, absolutely. Is your kid so it sounds to me like you're right. You're going to have this big guy on your hands. Yeah.
He's on trampoline for like 8 hours a day. He eats.
Oh my gosh.
Awesome. He's like all vegetables and protein, and he's super strong, and he has excellent proprioception. So he's able to catch himself. His balance is really good, and he's just super strong. And he knows how to use it. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like sometimes I'll just brace against him in the hallway, and he'll just push me back across, and I'll just drag across. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I'm trying to. It's a mix of like, the strength training. I'm gonna have to put on probably 20 pounds because I'm only like 190 pounds and 6'2". Okay. So I need probably 210, 220, BJJ, and then functional training, like odd object training with sandbags and Atlas stones and stuff like that. So it's gonna be interesting. I'll just be following him around. But the good side is it's like I don't think anybody's gonna mess with us because he's gonna be just huge.
Right. Son, get him.
Yeah. Stop him. Like,
sorry, he's autistic. Sorry. He didn't know what he was doing. Yeah. Okay. Hey, how old are you, by the way?
I'm 41.
41. Okay, I'm 54. So it's a thing that when you start hitting you're still technically old enough to be a quarterback, when you start moving in this direction, like, 54, I think that again, and I know a couple of dads get on here and they're just going to geek on MMA the whole time.
Oh yeah.
But it does help as you age. It does help to just kind of stay on top of your cardio, stay on top of your strength training, and have the gentle art up your sleeve if you need to throw a guy in a rear naked choke. So anyway, so about the temper thing, you mentioned something, and I want to respect time here. But you mentioned something earlier in the call, which is like suing the school district. Fun fact,
Hmm.
my partner is a lawyer, and so his mom is a lawyer, and she is actually working in ed law.
Hmm.
So I've had her at IEP meetings, which we all know what those are.
Yeah.
Um, and she was a weapon to be sure, because I went in like the average parent thinking, oh, the school is here to help us.
Yes. Help your
And
child.
yeah, and she helped me to discover that that was naive, and that in reality the school looks out for the school,
School.
and that your kid can become disenfranchised or not get the provisions that should be available to them for us as taxpayers, because you get somebody who just makes some sort of executive decision up the ladder and then attaches their own pride to it and
Hmm.
wants to dig in and go to war over whether or not your kid should have us, like I said, certain provisions. So, not to get into the ugly side of fighting school districts, but just as it's nice that Bennett has a dad who will um, do his best to educate, and plan B is
Text.
watch it, watch it. The real MVP is mom with the law degree.
Hmm. No, and
Yeah,
I could echo that, and yeah, I'm not going to go into any specifics about it, but the fact of the matter is that if a child, and any child, it doesn't have to be special needs, it could just be behavioral issues. If they're too difficult to handle, then the parents end up getting encouraged to find solutions at home or find solutions outside the school, and if they could do that, then they're not in violation of say ADA policies, and they could get rid of they're not relieve themselves of the expense. I'm trying to be politically correct here,
I
but
hear
that's
you, dude. I
that's
hear
something that
you.
they do. And so, especially with the
Yeah,
the parents of autism, I'm like, nah, I hate to say it, but the fight is part of the job. And don't let them do these things and know your rights. I also teach AI, so I'm like, you don't have to think very hard. Just ask AI what the policies in your state are and how you could, and give it your situation, and it'll give you an exact answer. And it's not legal advice; it's just tips, call it, to take the next steps. But it's, again, just like, you're the protector. Like that's your job, and don't get pushed around.
that's right. That's right. So, as far as your experience with your kid being violent in any way, what experiences? I'm curious. I'm wondering if there's overlap. What experiences have you had with him being aggressive in any way?
Oh, you know what? It's really against himself most of the time. So he has
Mm,
and this is really probably from the therapy and all those things where he doesn't turn it outwards most of the time. But he does know his strength and his weight. And so if they and a lot of his therapists, he goes to full-time ABA therapy,
okay.
are, smaller women. And so he just knows, like, well, I could just walk over here. Like, what are you gonna do? But we're
Yeah.
lucky in the sense that most of the, I mean, not lucky, but he will turn on himself. So he bites his hand, or he'll scratch his back. He has a few different. So we work through ABA therapy to try to stop those or redirect them is what we do. He has chew toys and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's been I think we're pretty thankful because we haven't had any big incidents where something worse happened because of his actions. But it's good to hear that from your perspective where you could deal with it. So let's just say that how have you dealt with the situation where there was a conflict and you had to you know deal with it?
So it's one of the things I'm in these online autism dad groups and things like that. It feels like a good place for me as a father to both give and receive support. And one of the things I see in the groups all the time is like our kid started breaking TVs at a really early age.
Hmm.
Thankfully, he doesn't do it anymore, but we joined the broken TV club pretty early on. He would get mad and he would throw the remote or something at the TV, and I'd be, off to Best Buy to get another TV and try to remember how the heck to hook it up and everything. Um, so other things that I hear in our group is like kids breaking, the dad's coming home and discovering like freaking holes in the plaster or whatever. And Bennett is somebody who went through a little phase of just picking things up and throwing them. So whether it was mom's wine bottle or my, my cup or whatever that I'm drinking water out of, we went through a throwing phase, and it's just I'm really triggered by violence because of my own childhood. So the moment I see that behavior, there's some instinct in me to like bad dog shut it down, and for me to understand that he's so dysregulated that his behavior is coming from a place of extreme terror is very challenging. Another example of his outbursts was at school. He started taking his clothes off, and he'd already hit puberty, so it was not cute. It was like, nobody wants to see your junk, dude. You got to keep your clothes on. And then he went to hitting, biting, and scratching other kids, which, makes other parents kind of come to you and say, you better put your dog on a leash. And you have to explain to them, look, I'm really trying here. I'm so sorry. You have to understand it's not aggression that comes from malice. It just comes from frustration. And then finally, when he started not only attacking mom, he will not attack me. It's like he catches the musky scent and he's like, yeah, I'm not going to hit dad. But his lizard hindbrain, something primitive, is like, yeah, I'm not pushing that button. But with mom, he will, because she's a pushover. So he started attacking himself. He started self-harming, biting his arm hard enough, biting his hand or his arm, just like you mentioned about your own child. Scratching his forehead until it bleeds, which is why he now has this permanent Band-Aid on his forehead that he wants to keep there because he's afraid that he's going to scratch his own forehead. And he was just bleeding. Like, we went through this period where it was like a horror movie. Our kid was constantly bleeding. So it's a kind of a rough time that when that testosterone hits, for the fathers of sons. I mean, girls also self-harm, but when his testosterone kicked in, he just started really self-harming hard.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I know that's really difficult, but it's really good for people to understand, and I love how you explain it as not out of malice. It's a reactive, kind of instinctual thing that neurotypical people are able to control, redirect, or somehow deal with in a way that doesn't really involve anybody else. But these kids don't always have that control, and I think it is hard for women to really understand the effect of the testosterone, because I remember going through puberty, and it's not, I don't want to make it sound like it's being on a drug, but it's sort of like, you've seen steroid rage, from adults. Just imagine that, except you're a 13-year-old child going through massive changes, and how do you control it? And that's where we have the, neurotypical have the advantages. You can control it and maybe suppress it, whereas special needs kids don't.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to compare it to being on a drug, for the reason that when your T levels start going low, what do you do? Joe Rogan and everybody else, TRT, they take testosterone, and I've got guys in my coaching culture who are, who take testosterone replacement therapy, and when they accidentally forget and double dose, they show up, they're like, I just had a really bad week. And I'm like, bro, did you go a little high on your TRT? Yeah. Can you tell? I'm like, yeah, kind of. So it really is a thing. Anyway, so So what else can I share with you here today in this getting to know you call? I love talking to you, man. You're a really nice guy. You're really smart. You got your stuff together. I loved hearing the AI thing, and I'm
Oh
a
yeah.
low key geek as well. You're a cool dude. I met you obviously through a client and friend, so I get why
No.
he was on about you. You're a cool guy, dude. I like you.
Oh, thank you. I try to be, I've always been into being practical, and actually just being able to talk like this is newer to me. Because I actually grew up with a lot of, depressive anxiety issues and, extreme introversion. So I think that's why it's easy for me to connect to the special needs community because I kind of consider myself there. And it's only been through a ton of self-growth and, really testing. What I found out when I was 39 was that I have like 100 food allergies that I had never addressed. And so
Oh,
it was
wow.
actually, man, I basically had IBS for about 25 years without knowing it, and it had a massive impact on my personality for one, but then also just my mood because I was constantly in pain. But since I grew up with a lot of discipline, I grew up very Catholic, and since I was a middle child, introverted, and surrounded by extroverts, essentially, it led me to just kind of close down. But once I
Hmm.
started opening up, I actually found I'm like, oh my gosh, I really enjoy, connecting to people. Plus, I have the ability to because I understand the other side of it. So it's been, thank you for saying that because it wasn't like this. I didn't have friends. I didn't, I never had like true friends because I didn't know who I was personally. So it's been a journey.
So fun fact. I'll be careful not to turn this into a life coaching session, but I have to say, um, my whole life I have defined myself as a confrontational introvert. And I think you'll identify with this. I'm picking up your what you're putting down. And a lot of us who are fathers of kids with autism later in life discover we might be on the spectrum as well. And I know it's offensive to say, well, we're all a little bit autistic. No, that's not true. That's like saying, oh, well, we all have a little cancer. No, no, we don't.
No.
You either have it or you don't. You know what I mean? Um, um, but I, at 51 years old, discovered that I started taking autism tests just as a
Mm.
goof. And I started discovering, but not to brag or nothing, but I was passing them with flying colors. and and so I was like, well, wait a minute. Could I be autistic? And then my own ableist conditioning started coming out, and I started making arguments like, you were the valedictorian of your high school, so there's
Mm.
no way that you could be autistic. You um, got a full scholarship to a reputable college. You couldn't be autistic and do that. And it turns out that a lot of autistic adults are super capable and high performing, but are also socially masking and dealing with an extreme amount of social anxiety. Yeah.
Mm. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, 100%. And
Yeah.
it's because I've actually had that argument with myself too. I'm like, maybe I'm autistic or I have ADHD or definitely something is here. Because I usually accredit it to had a bunch of concussions as a child, and so I'm like, well, maybe I just brain damaged or something.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
it's probably a
Yeah.
combination of everything. But I think that the best thing I've done, and this is kind of the reason for this podcast too, is just open up about it. All you have to do is talk about it, and then all of a sudden you realize that one, you're not alone. Two, it's not even that unusual, or it's not as unusual as you think it is that you're not normal, and then you start to see it everywhere else too. And it's kind of like talking to the people who aren't accepting your child, where you're like, well, or somebody that's just snapping, like the guy you talked about that had double dosed on his testosterone supplement, like you don't even see it. Like you're reacting terribly to this situation. And I'm taking offense to it when maybe I just need to look at the situation and say like, maybe you're a type of special needs that you don't even understand. And I'm just dealing with another special needs person. And so it helps with
Well,
the tolerance.
here's a fun fact. Again, I'm I'm like, I'm always opening new topics that I'm looking at the time, and I'm like, okay, let me sneak one more in here. Are you familiar with the term alexithymia? It's a
No.
big $5 word. So feel me on this, okay? Alexithymia. I'm trying not to trigger my echo dot
Oh
over.
yeah.
Uh, you know. Um, so what alexithymia is, it's officially now made its way into the DSM-5 thing or whatever it is. It's made its way into the clinical conversation as a valid condition. And what it is they used to think alexithymia was being sort of cold, robotic, beep boop, emotionless, which a lot of people who are autistic tend to be very literal, very, fact driven, very mechanical, maybe don't demonstrate high emotional awareness. So they thought initially that alexithymia meant that you weren't having the emotions and that it meant low emotional intelligence. It turns out that what alexithymia is that you actually may be highly emotional and even have higher emotional intelligence than average, but you don't understand your emotions. You haven't communicated about them. You don't have language for them. You don't have a model for managing them the way women, to their credit, and not to stereotype, but socially, women all go to the bathroom together. They all talk. They place heavy importance on communication and relationships. All women get an honorary freaking psych degree, you know,
So true.
because this is how they operate. Whereas, and this is the point I'm making here, there is an overlap between clinical alexithymia, which is this disconnection, this dissociation from emotions and feelings of yourself and others, which we see in autism, and normative male social conditioning.
Hmm.
So if you're the average bro out there who's like, men don't cry,
Yeah.
my value is my performance, then what are you feeling? I don't know, hungry? I need to poop, you might be not necessarily on the spectrum, but in this weird gray area because you've been conditioned as a male to um, put reason before emotion. And you might be out here thinking, maybe there's something wrong with me. So it's an interesting thing, isn't it?
Oh man, that's fantastic. I realized that, yeah, around the same time I was 39. I call it the awakening because I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm probably an empath and have never addressed it. And then, like you said, just repressed all these emotions, said they were wrong or inappropriate or something that shouldn't be expressed because nobody's like this, or nobody would understand it, or it would just cause outright rejection because of expressing it. So it's been, yeah, no, I totally identify with that, even though it's taken forever. And honestly, with all the social conditioning that you're talking about, it's understandable why that would happen. I mean, the media convinces us what a man is and what a man should look like and what a man should provide and blah 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 blah. And also, you should die at the drop of a hat for everybody else. And it's kind of like, I think we've been devalued a little bit, and
Yeah,
maybe
buddy.
maybe we should just treat ourselves as other people and just leave all the labels off the bat, and then you'll be a lot happier. And I think, well, thanks to people like you, we'll definitely have to talk again about your coaching and everything. But I think that's why what you provide is probably super valuable because it's reconnecting guys with the emotions that not only should be expressed but have to be expressed because they will be expressed, and they might just be expressed as cancer or be expressed as mental illness or be expressed a bunch of bad ways. And honestly, as special needs fathers, we don't have that luxury to deal with that. We have to express these things because it's the healthy thing to do. And thank you for doing that and helping other men do it too.
Yeah, man. I guess my final note here is that as your podcast really speaks to a demographic that I support and love and hope gets value from what we're doing here today. Dads are undervalued. If you don't believe me, when you're dating, obviously the first thing you're looking for in a female partner is somebody who had a healthy relationship with her dad, because we all know how it goes otherwise. And for same deal, show me a guy who had a healthy relationship with his father, and I'll show you somebody who has confidence and is like a really good dude. Whereas there's some of us, I'm a perfect example, who, because the father wound was pretty severe, like a shotgun blast, retroactively learning the difference between being like a good man and a good father and a good husband versus being some knuckle dragging troglodyte that's all the way over on the red pill Andrew Tate side of things. There's some, not to disparage those guys, but I'm just saying that's not my jam. And I think you learn that brotherly love is really important, but having guys feel comfortable with being that person for themselves, for others, and for their autistic kids, it really requires conversation. So I respect what you do. I love your podcast. I'm so happy that I met you, and I really appreciate you for having me here today, brother.
No, well, thank you so much, Dennis. This has been fantastic. I've learned a ton, and that's one of the things that I've realized for me personally. I'm like, man, if I'm learning and growing in some way, then every second I spend doing that is worth it.
Hell yeah.
And a lot of people need to realize that there's nothing selfish about it. Like a lot of people think of the stuff we're doing right now, where you're thinking about your feelings and you're thinking about your experience. It's like, no, I'm being selfish. It's like, no, because what you're doing is improving the person that you aren't yet. So technically, it's not for you, it's for somebody in the future. So
absolutely.
That's how you should look at it. Well, thank you so much, Dennis. Really appreciate your time and your openness, and really being an example of what happens. And no matter what you went through as a child and what kind of damage you received psychologically growing up, you can become a good guy. And that good guy is going to do a great job raising any children, but especially special needs. So thank you so much.
All right, man.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the Dads and Autism Land podcast. For more content like this, please subscribe.